Hello and welcome to our Salesforce United episode, a podcast about Salesforce and people who work with it. Here we discuss engineering discoveries, professional secrets, and careers of our guests. I'm Olga Dmitrieva, a Salesforce software testing engineer, and to my delight, your host.
Hello, my name is Elena Ulyanova. I'm a testing in Salesforce enthusiast, Salesforce consultant, and for my pleasure, the host of this Salesforce United podcast.
This episode is all about exploring and understanding Provar's pivotal role in Salesforce test automation realm. With our esteemed guest, Michael Daly, the Director of Technical Product Marketing at Provar, we will dive deep into the complexities and sophistications of Salesforce test automation. Sit back and let's dive into the world of Salesforce testing together. Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here. Looking forward to the discussion.
Hello, Michael. Nice to meet you. We have a great topic to discuss today. And as a first point, could you share some information about your professional background and experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got started in my, software development / testing career about 8 years ago. And I kind of started out as a full stack developer doing web development, initially working with a LAMP stack, so Linux, Apache, MySQL database, and PHP doing web development. And that kind of shifted into more of a different position where I went to work for a utilities company, and we were more of a Microsoft shop there. So everything was .NET and C# development. We did a lot of web development there as well, but we didn't really have any mature DevOps processes internally, and we weren't utilizing Salesforce or anything like that. So it was mostly in-house applications and Oracle apps. So initially, whenever I started there, I was working on the architecture team. And so it kind of happened naturally where I shifted into more of a DevOps focused role, and we wanted to make our organization more mature. So we started shifting from on-prem to more on-cloud solutions and utilizing more DevOps processes, such as CI/CD and better version control and more reusable components for our developers and things like that. But throughout that process, we have a lot of web apps that we were wanting to test, and it simply wasn't scalable for us to do it manually. So we did utilize Selenium for a lot of our test automation initially. And that was kind of my first exposure to test automation. That shifted more into more of a test automation engineering role, where I started writing a lot of automated scripts in Selenium for our in-house applications and our Oracle apps. And then I found out about Provar. I was actually contacted about a position at Provar, and I've been through various roles in my 5 years since I started April 2019 at Provar, and kind of began as more of a DevOps consultant, shifted more into an architectural role, and I've also worked on the sales engineering team. And then most recently, in January of this year, shifted into the product marketing position, which I've enjoyed my 7 months that I've been in that position now.
Okay, so you have a very rich and nice experience. And if to talk about Salesforce, how did your journey begin with the Salesforce, and do you like it in general?
Great question. I actually I hadn't been introduced to Salesforce at all before I joined Provar back in 2019. When I was working at my previous positions, as I mentioned, we didn't utilize Salesforce at all because we weren't doing any outbound sales, and we didn't have a CRM or anything like that. So Salesforce for me really began about 5 years ago. I had to quickly learn all that there was to learn, and I was kind of thrust into this seemingly endless ecosystem I was finding out is very fundamentally different from anything that I'd been involved in before. There's different approaches to the software development lifecycle, to testing, to DevOps, to release management in the Salesforce world. I have enjoyed it, and I think it's a very powerful platform. And I think there's a lot of interesting conversations happening in the Salesforce space today. So I have enjoyed my time there since I've shifted.
Today we are talking about Provar as a product. And could you give us a brief introduction about Provar and how it's related to Salesforce?
Yeah, absolutely. So Provar is a test automation solution built from the ground up to test Salesforce. Our company started in 2014, actually out of a Salesforce consultancy. In that Salesforce consultancy, they were doing a lot of test automation. So 10 years ago, they were using Selenium, and they found that the test automation they were building for Salesforce just wasn't working the way that they wanted it to. They weren't getting the right value out of it. They were having to maintain a lot of their automation scripts using Selenium because of Salesforce's dynamic nature. So that's how Provar was conceived initially 10 years ago. And that's kind of been our niche in the market since. So we've definitely been focused on Salesforce automated testing user journeys, and testing those business processes that are normally manually tested today. And as Salesforce becomes more mature and has more development alongside it, there's more of a need really for automated testing if you want to get to a point where you're accelerating rather your DevOps lifecycle and your release processes. So that's really where we found our fit in the product, or in the market rather.
Okay, so that's great. And no doubt that Provar is a great tool to use. But in your opinion, why don't all organizations use automation testing tools?
This is a good one here. And there's quite a lot to unpack.
A tricky one.
In fact, there's a lot of reasons why this could be the case. In my conversations from different users at events, on the web, just in community forums and LinkedIn, and just conversations I've had throughout the years, probably the main reasons that I see are lack of resources in both cost and just headcount. So not having the appropriate people in place to adopt automation is very critical if you want it to be successful. You have to have someone who actually is going to use those tools. So if you don't have a plan in place for that, and you don't have the budget, well, then it's kind of a non-starter. Another critical point here is just the awareness of it. As I mentioned, when I first joined Salesforce ecosystem about 5 years ago, I found out that there were a lot of processes that weren't as mature, and one of those was testing. And so I think a lot of people in the industry are becoming more aware of test automation as a potential solution, but I think it's still something that's not as prevalent as, say, just DevOps in general. And probably the third biggest one is just the complexity of test automation. I think a lot of people that are familiar with Selenium or other open source or coded frameworks, they look at test automation as being more of an engineering thing, and they think of it being a very complex issue to solve. It's not something that anyone can use typically. And that makes it difficult to implement successfully, because if you only have non-technical resources who are doing your testing today, it becomes very tricky to transition them into doing test automation if they're not familiar with the test automation concepts. So all those reasons, and there's of course more. It's also something that can be seen as more of a luxury for smaller businesses. Enterprises, it's definitely a lot more common to have test automation in place. But if you're a smaller business and you haven't really reached the scale where you need test automation, well, there may not be a lot of reason for you to adopt it just yet. But definitely something to consider if you're having issues with timing on releases and the time that it takes, and just the manual repetition of constantly running the same test over and over again.
Speaking about the complexity of the test automation of Salesforce applications, what, from your point of view, are the challenges which organization can typically face when using automation for Salesforce apps, maybe from technical perspective?
Right. So from a technical perspective, I think Salesforce, what makes it unique is that it is a software as a service, but it really functions for a lot of people as more of a platform as a service too, where people build their own applications on top of it entirely, and they customize it so much. In some ways, you may not even recognize it as Salesforce anymore. So that being the case, Salesforce also has their Salesforce releases, their tri-annual releases, where they always say that the DOM the structure of the HTML, the structure of the web pages is always going to be subject to change. So when you're talking about automation, typically you're using something like a page locator to identify elements, to click on them, to type in text, to toggle a button, to do something, right? All of those locators that you're using traditional tools, they rely very heavily on the structure of the web page. And the way that Salesforce's pages are built, a lot of times they're dynamic. They may render differently. We have dynamic page layouts. We have different personas. They have different profiles, different layouts for different users. The layouts could even change based on the org that you're using for your testing. So all of this and more makes for a very tricky automation process if you're using traditional tooling, because there's no real intelligence when it comes to how to identify elements on the page. That plus the fact that they also have modern web technologies that are being injected into the platform, like Lightning Web Components, and you can even write your own JavaScript nowadays in Salesforce and construct your own web pages that way. So there's a lot of complexities to the Salesforce platform that make it tricky to test. Not only that, but people are also migrating older ways of doing things from Salesforce Classic to Salesforce Lightning. And so we see all of that migrating over when you look at Visualforce pages and Apex components and things like that. There's a lot of complexity there. So that's really only scratching the surface of it. But anyways, there's a lot of technologies on the Salesforce platform today that apps could be utilizing, and they make it very tricky to test them.
Okay, so and imagine that a company has decided to utilize any automation tool, let it be Provar, for example. So what would you advise for these organizations in order to implement the tool successfully?
My advice for anyone who's selecting a test automation tool, or just any tool for that matter, to improve their Salesforce quality or to improve their Salesforce release process is to do your homework for sure. Focus on what your testing needs are as a business and consider the full scale of what you might be testing. Is Salesforce a critical component of what you want to test? Well, if it is, then you definitely want a solution that is catered to the Salesforce ecosystem. You don't want something that covers a more generic websites and then Salesforce is a small piece of that, because you may find that there are a lot of gaps, right, when you get into actually testing your scenarios. Also, as part of the homework process, most solutions these days do offer some sort of a trial. So Provar has this as well, where you can actually get a trial and you can get your hands on the tool and see if it works for you. See if you can actually use it. See if you can actually build a scenario in your org successfully, right? This is something that a lot of people may skip as part of the evaluation process, but is incredibly important. Another thing that I would think about is the alignment to the Salesforce roadmap as a whole. So we at Provar, we have actually 3 triannual releases that go along with the Salesforce roadmap. So that's something that helps keep us aligned to whatever Salesforce is changing or implementing. So if they make big sweeping changes, we're already kind of counting for those internally. And probably one of the most important ones for any tool that you adopt as an organization is to consider how that tool is going to fit into the rest of your tool stack. What other tools are you utilizing and how is it going to integrate? How do you want it to actually work in your day-to-day processes? Do you utilize things like Jira? Do you utilize version control systems such as GitHub or Bitbucket? Are you using anything for release management such as like Flowsum or Gearset or Capado? So all of those things should be considered when you're looking at a test automation solution, because you definitely want something that plugs in pretty nicely into all those tools so you can keep everything on the same page, so that your architecture team and your DevOps team is able to plug in the test automation into part of your DevOps process. So those are kind of the big things that I would definitely consider if you're considering any tool, and Provar specifically.
And if an organization decides to use Provar as a test automation tool for Salesforce, what could be your advice to start learning the tool or to start learning the automation using Provar? Is it challenging? Are there any specific prerequisites for it?
Yeah, great question. Test automation is such a broad subject matter that there's so many different resources that are available online to learn about. Obviously, you can utilize those to kind of get yourself introduced to the topic. There are actually a fair number of trailheads on the trailhead for Salesforce that focus on testing and QA in general, not necessarily automation, but if you're just new to the testing journey, then you can kind of start there. We actually have at Provar, we have our own online learning platform called University of Provar. So that would be a great place to start too, because we do have beginner courses and we have courses that are ranging from, you've never seen anything in testing in Salesforce to the very advanced testing courses. So it's actually free to create an account there, and all the courses are free as well. It's just provar.me. So if anyone wants to create an account there, they can. And we do offer certifications on there as well. So if you want to add those to your CV or your LinkedIn, that's always a great thing to do. But as far as prerequisites, I would say that definitely start on more the beginner courses in QA and testing in the Salesforce space, because it is very unique. I myself, coming from a non-Salesforce background 5 years ago, I already was familiar with testing concepts, but testing Salesforce is a little different. There's a lot of caveats, a lot of unique situations. So I would definitely familiarize yourself with what Salesforce testing is and some things to be aware of before you jump into automation. And as I said, we definitely have some courses on that, and there's some on Trailhead as well.
Okay, so that's a nice way to get familiar with the tool. But as far as I remember, you mentioned annual Salesforce releases. And I would like to ask you, how does Provar keep with the frequent updates and changes in Salesforce? What is the strategy?
Yeah, so I did touch on this a little bit, but I can shed a little bit more light on kind of what our strategy is internally. So obviously, Salesforce has their tri-annual release cadence where they have their spring, summer, winter release. We also have 2 releases that are kind of coinciding with every release. So typically we'll have about 6 releases a year as a product. That being said, our strategy for that is we get early access because we are a Salesforce partner. We get early access to those sandboxes where we can play with the new release. And what we have is we actually have an entire regression suite that covers all of the changes that may be coming as part of that release process. So we run all of our internal testing through automation and some manual testing to see if anything's changing in terms of how the tool is going to be used, if your test cases are going to keep working or not. So we take care of that ahead of time. So that way, whenever the release hits the end user and you update to the latest Salesforce release, you shouldn't have to worry about updating your test cases because we've already accounted for that internally in our own release. So that's one way that we take care of it. We also make sure that we're in alignment with Salesforce from a kind of a strategy perspective. So whatever they're focusing on in their platform and their releases, we try to keep that as a focus as well. So we're staying up to date.
Okay, thank you. The next question will be kind of philosophical. Do you believe that in general test automation could fully replace manual functional testing? Because Provar, it's not the code-based automation tool, and actually the functional testers can easily use it for testing Salesforce applications. So from your point of view.
Yeah, this is I like these types of questions because I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. First of all, I think thinking about AI and thinking about the usage of automation in general, not just testing, there's always going to be a need for an intelligent person behind the wheel. I think there's always going to be a need for someone who's familiar with testing, who's familiar with QA to be driving the ship, I guess you could say. So that being said, I definitely think there will always be a place for manual testing in the ecosystem because there's going to be things that you don't necessarily want to build automation for because you may only want to execute them a couple of times. So what I always tell people is if you're aiming for 100% automation coverage, then you probably have the wrong goal because in reality, you're probably never going to hit it. And there may not be some use cases that are as relevant or as necessary to automate if you're only going to execute them a couple of times. And if you think more about exploratory testing, which is really getting into more of those edge cases, those scenarios that you don't necessarily want to run every release and things like that, then you really do need a manual tester behind it, because it may be such a kind of an odd process to reproduce some of these bugs that we find, that it's not necessarily something that you would build automation for, but it is something that you want to be testing manually. So I guess that being said, to answer your question directly, I'll say no, it won't fully replace manual testing, but there will be an increasing amount of automation coverage as we progress and get more mature.
Okay, thank you very much. And to finalize our talk, I have a small final question to you. What do you think? How does Provar incorporate artificial intelligence trends in the testing process?
Yeah, so obviously AI is the hot topic these days. Everyone's talking about generative AI and predictive AI and things like that. We're always trying to find the ways that we can provide the most value with whatever we do, and AI is definitely a part of that as well. So we do have some things that are incorporated into our products that utilize generative AI and different AI, such as like assistants and things like that. So to go through the list, we do have a test case and test plan generation feature in our Salesforce application, Provar Manager, which allows you to generate test cases from user stories. So if you have a Jira or you have another work management or project management solution, you can import those into our application, and then we can generate a list of test cases that go along with them. Now, these won't be automated tests, but they will be kind of like basically a template for you. So we found it very useful for people who are not as familiar with QA and testing in general, and they don't necessarily know how to write a basic test case, a manual test case. So it kind of gives you a good starting point and a good template to use going forward. For the developers out there, for anyone who's scratching their head sometimes looking at Apex test failures and not sure what's going on, we actually have a root cause analysis that is driven by AI as well. So we're able to generate a root cause analysis, so why a test case or an Apex test failed, and give you a full report on it. So that way you can diagnose the issue and you can actually attach that to the execution record, so the user can see directly inside of Salesforce why something failed and steps to kind of resolve it. Outside of that, I did mention we have our own assistant. This is a part of all of our products. It's incorporated into it. It's basically our own chatbot. You could think of it that way, where we have ingested all of our documentation, all of our support articles, and everything like that is kind of the training model that we've used for that, where we've basically given you the ability to ask it questions around how to use Provar, what features you need to use to do certain tasks and things like that. And outside of that, there's obviously a lot of things that we want to do in the future, but we want to do it in the right way, and we want to do it in the way that gives the most value. So I will give a little teaser that we are looking into more advanced test case generation. So this is highly requested in the industry as a whole. People are wanting to find ways to automatically create automated tests using AI, which is something that I'm interested in as well, but it is very challenging. There's a lot of nuances there. So that's something that we're looking into. Additionally, we want to get into more predictive AI. So being able to anticipate changes and resolve them automatically using automation and AI is something that, again, is a very challenging problem, but I think it's one worth solving. So that's one that we're utilizing some AI concepts to look into as well.
Thank you, Michael, very much for the conversation. It was really very, very interesting. Thank you, dear listeners, for being with us. As always, we will be very happy to receive any comments, questions, and ideas. And if you like the podcast, please rate it on the platform and share with friends. Till very soon, till the next interesting podcast. Stay tuned.
Until then, keep trailblazing. Goodbye.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. This was great.